Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another KE and Coffee session. My name's Alasdair Cameron. I'm the Director of Strategic Engagement with PraxisAuril. Tamsin, would you like to say hello?
Yeah, hi everyone. Tamsin Mann, Director of Policy with PraxisAuril.
Okay, and please note that we are recording the session, so we'll make it available to those who weren't able to join us. For those who join us late, if I can ask you to keep your cameras off and muted, and we'll get you back on once we move into the discussion phase. If you do want to interrupt and ask a question during them, please use the raise your hand function that can be accessed through, if you click on participants, there's a little icon there, raise your hand, and we'll try and come to you. The chat should be available throughout, so please make use of that. So as normal, we'll have a bit of a discussion and then we'll go through into questions, anything you have. David, could I ask you to turn your camera off, please? And we'll get you on later on. Thank you. Okay, so this week we decided we would have a look at the recent NCUB R&D Task Force report. That's the Research to Recovery, published a couple of weeks ago. So this came on the back of the government's R&D roadmap, which was published back in July, seems like a lifetime ago. The R&D roadmap kind of set out this idea that research, development and innovation would play a fundamental role in empowering and shaping the businesses and sectors of tomorrow. And UKRI, as a result of that, asked NCUB to create this task force of leaders from business and academia. And the remit was to provide UKRI with advice on how the government's ambitions for R&D could be met through greater partnerships and collaborations. There's been lots of past reports in this area. And I guess the challenge for this task force was to show how the existing frameworks can be made to work better together to achieve scale and be more responsive to economic and societal changes. So not what initiatives are needed, but more about how we join things up. The main conclusions, so there's 10 recommendations to summarise them in 4 key areas. Priorities, so an economic plan with research and innovation as its engine. Synergies, business-focused offers, joining things up. Enablers, indicating strong foundations, and then attractiveness. The UK as a competitor in a global R&D and innovation market. Tamsin, how will we do you want to take each of those 4 key areas in turn? We start with priorities.
Yeah, I think there's a few general points to make just up front. One of which is I think we should congratulate the NCUB team for producing this in such a short amount of time. You know, the commissioned kind of May, June, and reporting in November is no mean feat, especially when everyone's working remotely. So we should acknowledge that, and also be thankful that it's a nice, concise report. It's only 40 pages, so 36-ish to actually read in the detail, and 10 recommendations, which is a manageable amount, that weren't trying to, they're recommendations that make sense. And as you say, it's not dramatic new starts, it's building on things that have already gone ahead. So those kind of general points to make. And the other point that from our point of view is that it was really, really good to see so many PraxisAuril people involved at the advisory group level. So informing each of these, in each of those 4 areas. So that's really nice that we very much did have lots of different voices around the table. So good to see.
And I think at the task force launch webinar, I think Lord Bellamora said that he was very surprised that, or impressed that the NCUB team actually been able to distill the very wide-ranging discussions down into something as concise as we've got in front of us now.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's look at so the first one, priorities. A couple of recommendations in there. So this is around how do we set targets and areas. The first thing is a refreshed industrial strategy. And I think you and I were speaking, the industrial strategy seems to have just recently been published, 2017. It's not really
feel that long ago.
Yeah,
no. In fact, I think it was actually made into a white paper in 2018. So that's even less time ago after all that consultation. And I can see the rationale behind a refresh, because remember, I suppose this report is kind of building on everything that's happened in the last year at the same time as kind of looking at that roadmap, which is building on the industrial strategy. But we're in a constant state of learning at the moment because of how the vaccine and other COVID-19 research has been deployed. So we're kind of learning from that activity in a crisis mode and seeing what we might use once we're out of that crisis mode. I mean, Louise Richardson from Oxford was very clear that we can't operate in crisis mode all the time. Too many other things have had to stop, but clearly we can learn things from that mode. But yes, and if you think about the industrial strategy and the things that put in train, they've probably only just got started, because these are big initiatives that you're trying to move, and universities, themselves, and some of these very large companies that were part of the task force, but are also very much embedded in that industrial strategy and the roadmap. They take a long time to kind of turn around and point in a new direction. So we don't want to see the industrial strategy kind of, we don't want to see it scrapped at all. We want to see the bits that are proving valuable to people, I suppose, built on more. So I think it's a refocusing, as they've said, and maybe tightening up that industrial strategy. I hope that's what it is anyway.
So, because I guess the report does make reference to the comment from the Industrial Strategy Council, saying that the only modest progress has been made in turning the challenges into policy proposals, and much less in implementing these proposals. So I guess we seem to be inching towards action at some point, but we need to move beyond that what into the how now. And I guess that's the R&D roadmap starting to set all that up.
Yeah. Really sorry, my phone's going. Sorry, I've turned it off now. It's all right.
So yeah, I guess the industrial strategy, you're right. It's that classic oil tanker analogy. It needs time to turn around. So we should be mindful of what's been put in place back in 2017-18, and look to refine it going forward, rather than throwing it all out and starting again. They do. I mean, they talk about commercial missions. So there are missions already, I think, baked into the industrial strategy, and I guess it's about making sure that there's sufficient weight behind those.
Yeah, and we've just seen, we're clearly very mission oriented at the moment, with the COVID response. But and the green mission launched by the Prime Minister last week or a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, we have those mission focused. I suppose it's ensuring that the whole system is lined up, alongside those missions. And then we always point out there's a danger in making everything too mission focused, because then if something comes out of the blue, and we're living through that at the moment, then you don't have the power to respond to that need, because you're too focused on the mission. So that's where we go back to the message that you have to support the basic research, because you don't quite know where the next mission, I suppose, is going to come from in the longer term. Okay,
so the next main area was around synergies. So really focused on a business-focused offer, creating synergies between the components of the research and innovation system. And this is where they do actually, there is one thing that jumps out as actually something that could be done. This is this innovation collaboration zones aligned with the missions.
Yeah, it's just another. Is it something new, or is it just another name for clusters, university enterprise zones we've got going at the moment? We've got various different kinds of clusters called different things. And I was wondering, how do you recognise that you're in these particular types of zones and clusters? I suppose that is the tax breaks that you're given for being part of this, or the particular incentives that you're given for investing in this for the universities. It might be you know, particular types of collaboration that you're encouraged to have within these clusters. Yeah, and the geography of these clusters is always interesting, because is it along geographic lines, or is it around kind of more sector-based lines, and who gets to be part of these super clusters? Are they identified by the government? Are they more bottom up? And there are, you know, there are good examples of these around at the moment, and they did, you know, there were some that popped up when this report was launched. There were, you know, there were a few. There was one around the Humber talking about its, you know, its green energy initiatives and things. You know, things that are already there. There was mention of the Babram as the Babram Institute here in Cambridge as one of these potential innovation superclusters. Well, if you live here, you know that Babram is kind of on the edge of Cambridge, and there's quite a bit of, you know, villages like the one where I live, which is between that and Addenbrooke's. Well, are we part of the innovations? You know, so the geography is quite interesting, I think. Yeah. So that's to be resolved, I suppose. Yeah.
So, I mean, because I guess the CBI talked about their catapult zones, which seems similar. So there's almost like, it feels a bit of a push behind this zoning clustering type. And then the report does make mention of free ports, which I'm not particularly familiar with. But again, it seems to be this desire to focus some activity. And it's been interesting because the catapults, if you look at the high value manufacturing catapult, it's very distributed in its model, whereas others, I think, started off as more central, but seem to have like satellite hubs developing. So I think, you know, clustering in one geographic location may be the preference, but sometimes there's a need to, you know, to branch out into other areas as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, otherwise you're going to get duplication, aren't you? Just
yeah,
so.
yeah. And the other recommendation in there, UKRI should join up funding schemes to deliver commercial missions. I mean, I think there's probably a general question there about who is joining everything up. There's a lot of, you know, we've got CBI making recommendations. I guess everybody's doing lots of stuff, and there definitely feels that there is a synergy in the system by bringing all those together in a better way. But who's ultimately responsible for doing that?
Yeah, I mean, you could say that, you know, UKRI is the obvious, or an obvious place in terms of, you know, the kind of public sector side of things, but it doesn't feel like there's a lack of things going on, and it does feel sometimes that there's so much going on. It's really hard to just keep an eye on not only what's being initiated, but how things are going. I mean, if you take the Connecting Capability Funds, which is projects we've discussed before, them alone, you know, those, is it 50, I can't remember how many there are now, 15-ish projects, you know, it's hard to keep up with what they're doing, let alone all the other many initiatives that our members and their partners have, you know, are running all the time. And every day there seems to be a new group that I stumble across or have my attention drawn to, and a new initiative. And it's really hard to kind of really stand back and see what all these different projects are adding to the whole, you know. And I can imagine if you're, and we're on the inside, so if you're a company on the outside, or you know, just somebody wanting to understand this landscape, I can see that you do long for just one place where you could go and kind of see all these things mapped. I mean, we come back to this need for mapping in a way, I suppose, and seeing the potential synergies between different types of projects, different types of funding. But I think UKRI could do a better job of just explaining what it's funded and how they fit under these, whether it's geographic lens or a sectoral lens, or, you know, what they're hoping to get out of these projects at the end. I think they could do a bit of a better job of that, because it's terribly complicated.
Okay, so the third main area is around enablers, and they're referring here scaling up the enablers of research and scaling up the enablers of the research and innovation system, developing a larger and more adaptable and diverse R&D workforce, invest in emerging technologies and infrastructure. This feels like it's more in the kind of the university type remit. Yeah. There's a lot more that might apply to universities in here.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to what we've spoken about at length before around kind of diversity and research culture and promotional cultures, and they just need to give people more flexibility in what they choose to pursue as what we might call a research career, you know. So whether that's moving in and out of between industry and academia, or whether it's pursuing research which is, you know, intrinsically linked to industrial projects or to projects with external organisations, and having those recognised through other routes than publication necessarily. I think it does come back to those discussions, doesn't it? But there's also a lot about, you know, students and student entrepreneurs and entrepreneurialism within universities and at the PhD postdoc level. And that, you know, I definitely see the literature and the initiatives in that space increasing, you know, very rapidly. Lots and lots of, you know, projects that are, you know, educating, you know, or providing entrepreneurial skills, but also, you know, looking at venture capital for that kind of area, and educating particularly PhDs, postdocs, in how to go about setting up companies and things, whether that's with their universities or beyond that. So I think that's that seems like a very sensible, you know, emphasis to put on the skills, because that's what companies want and it's what people need. So it seems a good place to push.
So I guess that there's one recommendation in here that you can sense the hand of the vice chancellors who were on that task force, you know, pushing this, that UKRI must invest sustainably in fundamental research, so increase QR research funding. I guess there's also a you know, a veiled comment in there about the I guess the 80% full economic cost that tends to go, and the cross subsidy that's been sustainable, well, maybe not sustainable in the past, but certainly with drop in international student numbers, suddenly that, you know, that cross subsidy is under a massive threat, and I guess a lot of universities are finding it really hard.
Yeah, and I think that's why, you know, there will be a lot of people watching the budget today and kind of digging down into the detail to see whether, you know, whether the promises about R&D spend and about, you know, protecting QR will come good. And I guess we'll see the impact of COVID and the international student situation, you know, that will come out in due course. But yeah, I mean, PraxisAuril has always, you know, very much said, you know, you protect your basic research because that's the pipeline for your commercialization in, you know, 5-10 years time. So you've got to have that pipeline of research going in. I did think, you know, I did think in this context that something that was missing for me a bit in this whole report on reflection was the involvement of non-university research centres and you know, their role in skilling people up and investing in research, and also doing some of the development as well. We talked about PSREs a couple of weeks ago. So that, you know, if the kind of refresh of the industrial strategy is meant to strengthen, you know, the whole system, then I think that group of R&D players has to be brought into this conversation more explicitly, because there isn't any representation from them, as far as I could see, on the task force or the advisory groups at all. And I think just making it that very, you know, universities and business, it doesn't really, you know, it's not the whole picture. And that's
and those types of organisations were certainly singled out within that R&D roadmap. We did. Yeah,
they were
actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does feel that, and talking about different career opportunities for early career researchers, that, you know, a long career in academia may not be what they want or possible. So having, and I guess that's what they're talking about in this kind of permeable, you know, between business, academia, research organisations, you know, that flow of knowledge more back and forward. So to close off, the last one was attractiveness, and this idea of being a competitor in a global R&D and innovation market. They talk about the need for a comprehensive firm or FDI strategy for R&D, to retain, so it's not all about just bringing new stuff in, but retain and attract some of those global mobile businesses that do invest in R&D. And I guess that's, the report also makes mention that if we want to achieve the targets we've got in R&D, we can't just do that by investing in the companies, or the companies that currently do it, doing a bit more. We need to be, you know, onshoring, bringing stuff in to do. And, you know, I sense our friend Graham Reed's hand in this, where he talks about, well, sorry, not him, the report talks about encouraging UKRI to create a global collaboration fund for unis to kind of pool their resources and be more attractive to those inward investment. I mean, it wasn't that long ago we were talking about what Graham had suggested for our colleagues in Wales,
exactly,
pooling their resources. So that seems that the CCF, you know, initiatives has been really successful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so that on an international scale. Yeah, but I mean, why not? Yeah, does it that just mean? I guess it does just mean international opportunities for UK universities. It doesn't mean in partnership with other international universities, which might actually be more effective if you're talking about global companies. Then how about some global university alliances to, you know, if you think about the companies that were involved in this report, you know, the BPs and the BT, well, maybe not BT, but the VPs and some of the others, you know, they're global companies and they have global research interests. You know, they're not just investing in the UK. So why not make a fund that meets that need, as well as just, you know, attracting more into the UK, and think about the needs of the smaller businesses as well, which isn't a group that was particularly explicitly identified on this task force either. So I think that's something to bear in mind.
It reminds me, there was some interesting comments made. I think it's Mark Logan, who used to be with Skyscanner, who was commissioned by the Scottish government to look at the kind of the tech ecosystem in Scotland. And there was an interesting, he talked about the investment in technology type organisations in Scotland a while back. You know, when we had Silicon Glen, it probably would be Silicon Glen. Yeah, Silicon Glen. So those organisations were parachuted in at almost what you would say the end of an innovation pipeline as a massive organisation. And when they left, the pipeline at the very beginning was bereft of a lot of activity. So Mark was advocating how we need to push stuff in at the start. We need those graduate startups, those spin-ups, spin-outs, and startups to be creating, you know, the very start of that pipeline. And only a very few of them will get to be the kind of unicorns that we all read and celebrate. But it is, you know, it does skew the system if you just parachute big companies in. So it's good that they're advocating a kind of double edge on that. Yeah,
definitely.
Okay, Tamsin, anything final to say on that before we open up?
So there was lots of talk of clusters and connection and collaboration, and it just comes back to the point that you need lots of people for all this. So you know, we are members, you know, an organisation that represents people who connect other people, other organisations. Organisations don't connect themselves, people connect organisations. And you need lots of people running around and, you know, following up opportunities, spotting opportunities, making things happen, to really be the glue between all these different initiatives that are going on. It's all very well having, you know, new types of cluster. So I've forgotten the name of them already, innovation collaboration zones. But you need business developers, and you need salespeople, and you need people who can write contracts and define the IP and all that kind of thing. So you need lots of KE professionals, which is good news for all of us.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at the some of the comments in the chat. So there's Hitesh is asking, you know, the formation of UKRI, has it led to a more joined up approach? It's a shame we don't have Alex, or, you know, we've had lots of conversations with Tony Soterio, who you know, who's heading up that area. So it's certainly they feel like they're gathering steam in that.
I think that's right. I mean, they're still just, they've only just got their new, you know, head of UKRI. So let's give them a bit of chance to get going. But I think there is a lot in the pipeline from UKRI. Yeah.
And Catherine is upsetting all our academic colleagues by saying that there needs to be more obligation on the recipients of grants to commercialise it all. But it's interesting because the report does stress this, that it's not just universities that can fix this problem. The answer to this question is universities hand in hand with government and business. So it's yeah, there's a lot of, sometimes it feels easy for government to exert pressure on universities to take certain causes of action,
Yeah.
The harder thing is to get business to do it, but actually that's where the scalability is.
Yeah, and actually Sam Laidlaw in his introduction to the report does, one of the first things he says is that not enough businesses invest in R&D, to the level that we need them to do. And I remember when I worked in business development, one of the tools we used was the R&D Scoreboard. There used to be a UK R&D Scoreboard, and you could, very quickly see who was spending on R&D in the UK, and it was quite a useful reference point. If you needed to do some business development and you needed to go and see who was spending the money, then just running your eye down that list was useful. You can do it. You can get that kind of ranking through the EU for now. But I do wonder whether some kind of R&D scoreboard would be useful, because universities are constantly being ranked on how well they're doing for university business collaboration, and we don't have a similar comparative ranking really for businesses, not one that's so visible. You can get, I'm sure Thomas could run us up one up in his spare time, but it's having that visibility. It's having that visibility, isn't it, of who's doing the spend and where they're doing the spend.
Yeah, I can sense them thinking if we find ourselves at the top of a chart, all we're going to get is deluged by university business development people every day wanting to work with us. Right, let's see if there's any comments. Anybody wants to stick their hand up and make a comment or ask a question. Not that we might be able to answer it, but we can give a suggested opinion. So there's Kate. Let's
turn my video on.
Yeah. Okay, so
I'm never one to sit quiet. I can't help it. Sorry.
Hi, Kate.
I just put some comments in. One was that if you read everything so far, it's all about having like focused areas and that, and not this big breadth of stuff that we currently look at. But then I think I asked, Amanda Soloway did something on CBI or one of the other presentations. So I directly asked and said, right, okay, you haven't got money for everything. What are you stopping? Doesn't win votes, does it, to go, right, we're going to stop that, that and that. So I think there's an underlying bit that will come out, proliferate to the top at some point in the near future. The other one is doing the role that I do, you definitely see different success metrics for this. And for everyone to win is quite difficult. There is definitely a little path through it, but be careful what you measure, because it does drive behaviours. So Catherine put in there about commercialising, and you're going to put that pressure on academics. Well, hang on a minute, they're not measured on that. So why would they need to do it? What's their driver for that win? There's a better good for the country. People aren't measured on better good, are they? They're measured on their particular performance. And so I think until they address that, of is it GDP, is it about publishing papers, is it patents, is it commercialisation, then you won't get that evenness that the government wants.
Yeah, I do think there's an awful lot bound up in the research culture, and until academics, I suppose, who've gone into academia for different reasons, but ultimately to pursue some research. I feel sorry for academics who just want to, who do want to pursue that research and do feel that pressure of, of commercial, the commercialization, particularly, not the knowledge exchange, that the other forms of knowledge exchange, but that pressure on, the focus around commercialization. Must be quite hard if you're not that way inclined. I'm quite a big fan of VTI's work that they've done on competencies. People who are inclined in that way and want to pursue that route should be supported too, but not everybody should be forced down that route. So it's about getting that balance, isn't it?
It's like making engineers managers, isn't it? It's a different skill set. Do you lose a really good engineer, but the promotion is to make them a manager, so you get a rubbish manager? So people go into academia for research. If they wanted to do commercialization, they wouldn't have gone into academia. It is a different skill set for them.
Yeah, and I think there needs to be room for people to try things out as well. So I'm quite a big, I've advocated, the fellowship models. NERC has done a fellowship model for KE, so you can try out some knowledge exchange without, you do that within a grant. So you've won a grant, you get a KE fellowship, and you're kind of given permission to do that exploratory work. And I suppose there are some of the learned societies have more commercialization focused fellowships. So you're getting that time, that safe space to do a bit of experimentation and see what you like. But then you've got your main track research career, I suppose, to go back to. So I think more of that kind of thing having flexibility, but not making people choose between one or the other is important.
I think, wasn't it in the NCUB report they mentioned about getting people, or in the roadmap, from industry into academia? And they've done a lot, UKRI, with their Future Leaders Fellowship.
Yeah, yeah.
And they've had only about 5% uptake, I think, in industry. And that's because, however much you say, it's not about the money. It's releasing that person from doing their job in business. If you are a commercial business, that job's still there. It's a great opportunity for the individuals and stuff. So that it still really does only work one way, which is part of the problem.
Right, we're going to have to. I was reminded of a couple of my favourite quotes in there, but I'm going to misquote them terribly. So I'm sure it was Einstein that talked about if you measure a fish on its ability to climb a tree, you're always going to be disappointed. And then I think JFK said something about GDP. It's great at measuring the cost of everything but the value of nothing, which I think so yeah, absolutely. Be careful what you measure or how you measure stuff. We've run out of time terribly. Tamsin, thank you so much. Again, that's been really, we're off to see what the Chancellor had to say about investment in our universities and how we can work. Thanks all for your time today and taking part in your questions. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time and hope to see you then. Thanks again, Tamsin. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.